She was 7 months pregnant, standing at her kitchen window, washing grapes, listening to a podcast on her husband's iPad. And then a notification appeared on the screen that she was never supposed to see. 7 words. 7 words that told her everything. She did not scream. She did not call him. She did not throw a single thing. She sat down, put both hands on her stomach, and she made a decision that would change everything. Because what Brad Henderson did not know, what he could not have calculated in all his careful planning, was that the woman he had written off as maintenance, the woman he had described to his girlfriend as someone who would not even notice, had spent the last 8 days building something he never saw coming. He had a secret hotel. She had a folder. He had a lawyer. She had 3 years of his financial records. He thought she was distracted by the pregnancy. She was using it. And on the night, he sat down to dinner with another woman at his favorite restaurant in Chicago. A waiter walked to his table carrying an envelope. His name was on the front. His attorney's name was on the return address. And inside were 140 pages that ended his marriage, his finances, and his carefully constructed double life in a single moment, in a room full of people, with nowhere to hide and no version of events that could save him. Stay with me, because this is not just a story about betrayal. This is a story about what a woman is capable of when she finally decides to stop being careful with someone who is never careful with her. What you are about to hear will change how you see silence, how you see patience, and how you understand the kind of strength that does not announce itself until it is ready. If this story speaks to something you are carrying right now, or to someone you love, share it before you leave. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe. We put these together for the women who need to hear them most. Now, let us begin. There is a specific kind of stilt that descends on a woman when she realizes the life she is living is not the life she is actually in. It does not arrive with noise. It does not feel like discovery. It feels like a floor giving way beneath furniture you have been rearranging for years, certain the foundation was solid. On a Tuesday evening in October, Claire Henderson was 39 years old, 7 months pregnant with her first child, and standing in the kitchen of the home she and her husband had spent 4 years renovating together. Crown molding they had debated across 2 full weekends. Subway tiles she had driven to 3 different showrooms to find. The garden window above the sink that was technically too expensive, but that Brad had said yes to because he had seen her face when she looked at it. She was standing at that window, washing a colander of grapes, watching the last of the October light move through the backyard, when her phone buzzed on the counter beside her. It was a calendar notification, not from her phone, from Brad's iPad, which she had been using to stream a podcast while she cooked, and which had never, in 3 years of sharing an Apple account, given her any reason to look at anything other than the weather. The notification read, Kayla, anniversary, table at Marchetti's, 7:30, do not be late this time. Claire put the colander down. She dried her hands on the dish towel, slowly, because her hands needed something to do. She looked at the notification for a long time, and then she did something that would determine everything that came next. She did not text Brad. She did not call the number listed. She did not throw anything. She sat down at the kitchen table, placed both hands flat on the surface beside her rounded stomach, and she breathed. And she thought, before I do a single thing, I needed to know exactly what I am dealing with. That decision, that one moment of stillness in the middle of everything falling, is the reason this story ends the way it does. Stay with me. To understand what Claire found, you have to understand what she believed she had. Brad and Claire Henderson had been together for 9 years and married for 7. They had met at a corporate fundraiser on Michigan Avenue. She was managing the event. He was attending it. He had found her in the middle of orchestrating 17 moving parts with the calm efficiency of someone who actually enjoyed complexity. He had asked if he could take her to dinner. She had said she would let him know at the end of the night. She called him the next morning. That was the kind of woman Claire was. She finished what she started before she started something new. Their first years together were good in the way first years often are when two people are genuinely compatible. She was creative, intuitive, socially skilled. He was analytical, driven, professionally magnetic. They balanced each other in the ways that matter when you are building something real. She had her own business then, Henderson Events, which she had built from a contact list and a reputation for never missing a detail by the time she met Brad. She had a team of 6 and a waiting list for spring weddings. And then, gradually, she did not. Not because Brad asked her to stop. That would be too simple, too easy to name. It happened in the accumulation of small moments that each seemed reasonable on their own. Brad made partner the same year they got engaged. The firm required more of him. His schedule became unpredictable. Someone had to be the one whose schedule bent. And the unspoken logic of whose career bent first had already been decided somewhere beneath the surface of their conversations. She scaled back to 3 events a year, then 1, then none. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself a lot of things. When their fertility struggles began, 2 pregnancies in 3 years, neither of which made it past 10 weeks. The marriage absorbed the grief the way long marriages absorb grief, imperfectly, quietly, with a distance that both people noticed and neither fully named. Brad threw himself into work. Claire threw herself into trying again. And when she, finally, at 39 years old, saw the word positive on a test she had taken while sitting on the bathroom floor, because she could not stand the waiting anymore. She had felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Safe. She had believed, completely, that the hardest part was behind them. She had not yet read the calendar notification on Brad's iPad. She had not yet gone to the calendar application and found that the entry about Kayla was not alone. She had not yet understood that the man who had held her hand through 2 losses and said, "We will keep trying," and kissed her forehead at 4 in the morning when the grief was too large to sleep through, had been building an entirely different life while she was building this one. But she was about to. And the woman who walked into that discovery, the woman standing at the garden window with the dish towel in her hands, was not the same woman who would walk out of it. The woman who walked out was someone Brad Henderson had, in 9 years of living alongside her, fundamentally failed to see. That failure was going to cost him everything. Claire sat at the kitchen table for 11 minutes after she read the notification. She counted. She would remember the number for years. Then she did 4 things, one after another, with the methodical calm of a woman who has decided that clarity is more valuable than speed. First, she went to the shared account settings and turned off the sync notification so Brad would not see that his iPad had pushed something to her phone. Second, she opened the calendar application. The entry about Kayla was not alone. There was Kayla dinner, Marchetti's, Tuesday, Kayla lunch, Spagia, also a Tuesday. A calendar event with no title at all. Recurring, every other Thursday. 11 entries in total, over 6 months. All marked private. All appearing on a second calendar within their shared account. A calendar labeled simply personal, that she had never noticed before because she had never had reason to look. He had hidden it in plain sight, inside the account they shared. Visible only if you expanded the calendar view past the default. She expanded the calendar view. She kept breathing. Third, she went to the junk drawer in the kitchen, where Brad kept paper receipts he meant to file for expense reports and never did. A habit that had irritated her for 7 years. She pulled them all out and sorted them on the kitchen table. She found 6 receipts. None of them were from restaurants she had been to with Brad. 4 were from Marchetti's, which was 12 blocks from his office, and which Brad had described, on 2 separate occasions, as too loud and not worth the price. He had said this while suggesting a different restaurant when Claire had proposed Marchetti's for their anniversary 2 years ago. She had agreed. Of course she had agreed. 2 receipts were from a place she did not recognize, called Lena's on the Green. She looked it up on her phone. Small, intimate. The reviews mentioned the lighting. the noise level being low, the tables being well spaced, the kind of restaurant someone chooses when they want privacy. She photographed all 6 receipts with her phone. The fourth, she walked upstairs to Brad's home office, opened the file cabinet she had always had access to, and she began, methodically, to look. She was not looking for confirmation. She already had that. She was looking for the full picture. Behind a folder labeled Taxes 2021 and a folder labeled Home Warranty, she found an envelope. Inside the envelope were 2 receipts from the Langham Hotel, room charge, minibar, 1 breakfast for 2, both from the past 4 months. Both on nights that Brad had told her he was working late, that she should not wait up, that it was a big week and he needed to stay focused. She had left his plate in the refrigerator both times. She had left little notes on the foil. She photographed both hotel receipts. She put the envelope back exactly where she had found it. Then she walked downstairs and made dinner. When Brad came home at 8:15, moving through the front door with the easy confidence of a man who does not believe he is being watched, she put a plate in front of him and sat across the table and asked him how his day was. He told her about a deposition that had run long, a difficult client. Henderson was a solid account, but the principal was difficult to manage. He just rolled his shoulders the way they did when he was tired and asked if she had added the prenatal appointment to the shared calendar because he wanted to make sure he could block the time. She said she had. She passed him the salt before he reached for it. She smiled at him across the table, and the smile was real, because what she was feeling was not anger. Not yet. What she was feeling was the particular and clarifying sensation of someone who has just understood that the rules of this situation are entirely different from the ones she thought she was playing by, and that the only way to protect herself and the daughter growing inside her was to learn those rules completely before she made a single visible move. She cleared the dishes. She said goodnight. She went upstairs. She lay in the dark for a long time before she slept. She was already building. The woman Brad Henderson believed he had married would have confronted him within 48 hours. She would have left the receipts on the kitchen counter, picked up the phone, said his name in a voice that made the walls contract. The woman Brad Henderson had actually created, through 9 years of gradually redirecting her toward his needs and away from her own, was something he had not anticipated. She was a woman who knew how to organize, who knew how to document, who had spent 8 years managing complex events, with multiple moving parts and difficult stakeholders and deadlines that did not bend because someone's feelings were hurt. She applied every one of those skills to the problem of her husband. Over the 4 days following the calendar notification, Claire moved through the shared life they had built, together with the focused attention of someone conducting an audit. She was looking for the true shape of things beneath the presented surface. The credit card statements were the first major source. She printed 2 months of their joint statements from the online account and went through them line by line at the desk in the spare bedroom, with a yellow highlighter and a legal pad. 12 charges she could not account for, all at restaurants or hotels, all on evenings or afternoons when Brad had given her an explanation she had accepted without a second thought. She cross-referenced the charges against her own phone records, against the texts she had sent him on those evenings asking what time he would be home, against his responses. The responses were consistent, detailed, specific. He was not careless with the lies. He had put actual thought into them. That attention to detail, she realized, was something she recognized from the man she had married. He was thorough in everything he did. She had loved that about him once. On day 2, she called Donna, not to tell her everything. Not yet. She called Donna and said only, very quietly, that she needed a favor. That Donna's husband Tyler was good with computers and financial records, and that she needed someone to help her understand what she was looking at in some account documents. She said she would explain when she could. Donna said she and Tyler would be at her house on Saturday. They were there by 10 in the morning. Tyler sat at the kitchen table with Claire's printed statements spread around him and a laptop open and said nothing for a long time. Then he said, very carefully, that he wanted to show her something that was available to her through their shared digital account, information she was fully and legally entitled to access, and that she should look at it and decide what she wanted to do. What Tyler found in 40 minutes of patient, methodical searching was a Gmail address linked to Brad's Apple ID, an account that was not their shared account, a secondary account, one Brad had apparently created several years ago and used for correspondence he did not want appearing anywhere their digital lives overlapped. Claire looked at the address on Tyler's screen. She asked Tyler to leave her alone for a moment. He and Donna went to sit in the backyard without asking any questions. Claire opened the account. For one long, strange moment, she sat with her hands in her lap without touching the keyboard, because she understood that what she was about to read would permanently change the shape of every memory she had from the past 2 years. Then she read. There were 47 emails in the thread between Brad Henderson and a woman named Kayla Pierce. Claire found Kayla on LinkedIn in under 10 minutes after she had seen the name in the first email. Junior associate at Whitmore and Associates. Brad's firm. 28 years old. A professional headshot with a carefully composed expression and the specific energy of someone ambitious and aware of it. Claire read all 47 emails. It took her 2.5 hours. She sat in the kitchen chair, and she read about dinners and inside jokes and a weekend at a country inn in Connecticut, which had been booked under D. Carter occupancy for 2. The weekend that Brad had told Claire he was at a sales conference in Philadelphia. She had packed his bag that weekend. She had folded his shirts. She read Brad writing. In May. I know this is not simple, but I have not felt like this in years. Maybe ever. She sat with that sentence. Maybe ever. She read Brad writing. In response to a question from Kayla about when he was going to leave. After the baby. It is easier to negotiate when there is a child involved. Gives me leverage. Leverage. He had used that word about his unborn daughter. Claire read the email 3 times. Then she put her phone face down on the kitchen table and she sat very still and listened to the sound of Donna and Tyler talking quietly in the backyard, the occasional sound of a chair moving, the ordinary sounds of a Saturday morning continuing around her. She did not cry. She was not ready to cry yet. She was something harder than that. She was making a decision. She picked up her phone and she called a number she had kept in her wallet for 3 years, on a business card given to her by a colleague named Meg Crawford, a name Donna had mentioned once after her cousin's difficult divorce with the words she got the lake house. The call went to voicemail. Claire left a message. She said her name. She said she needed to make an appointment. She said it was about a divorce. She ended the call. She walked to the back door and told Tyler and Donna they could come back inside. Donna looked at her face and did not ask a single question. She put the kettle on. Margaret Crawford's office was on the 31st floor of a building on Wacker Drive, and it looked like what it was. The office of a woman who had been winning for a long time and had stopped needing to announce it. Claire sat across from her on a Wednesday morning with Brad at his office 14 blocks away, believing she was at a baby gear appointment downtown. She set a folder on the desk between them. Inside the folder were 47 printed emails, 6 photographed hotel receipts, 12 highlighted credit card line items, a 4-page chronological summary she had typed up the night before, cross-referencing dates, locations, and the cover stories Brad had given her on each occasion. Meg Crawford opened the folder. She read for 9 minutes without speaking. When she looked up, she said, "How long did it take you to put this together?" 8 days. Claire said. A pause. "You are 32 weeks pregnant. 32 weeks and 4 days." Claire said. Meg closed the folder with a particular deliberateness and said, "This is the most organized preliminary documentation I have received from a client in 11 years of practice. And I want to be honest with you about something. You have a strong case. But I want to make sure you understand what strong case means in family court, so you are not surprised by what comes next." "Tell me," Claire said. Meg told her. The marriage was 7 years old. Claire had contributed to it financially in the early years and operationally for the past 4, managing the household, the renovations, the social calendar that Brad's professional life required, but that he had never organized himself. A judge would consider total contribution in ways that were often more nuanced and more favorable to the non-earning spouse than people expected. The infidelity documentation was relevant. Illinois was a no-fault divorce state, meaning the divorce itself did not require grounds. But evidence of marital misconduct could influence asset division and, more importantly, set the tone for the entire proceeding. Tone mattered more than most people realized. Their home was jointly owned. Their primary investment accounts were jointly titled. Brad's pension through the firm would be subject to division. And then Meg said the thing that dropped the temperature in the room by several degrees. He will file for custody. Probably shared custody initially. The standard argument is that it is in the child's best interest to have both parents actively involved. That position is not necessarily adversarial. But Claire, I want you prepared for the fact that it will feel adversarial, especially in the early stages. What if he fights for primary custody? Claire said. Meg looked at her steadily. Then we fight harder. Courts are clear on the maternal bond during the infant period. You are not going to lose primary custody of a newborn, but we need to move before he does. Whoever files first controls the initial narrative, and in family court. Narrative matters enormously. When? Claire said. Ideally this week. Claire drove home from Meg's office and sat in the garage for 6 minutes before going inside. She texted Donna one line. I have got him. She believed it. For 36 hours. She believed it completely. Now, before we follow what happened next, I want to speak directly to anyone watching this who is not just watching a story. If you are in the early days of a discovery like Claire's, here is what the attorneys and financial experts consistently say about those first critical days. Do not confront until you have documented. Once a confrontation happens, evidence disappears. Emails get deleted. Hotel accounts get closed. Paper trails go quiet. You need the full picture before you put it in his hands to manage. Open a personal checking account in your name only, at a different bank. Move 3 to 6 months of personal expenses into it. This is not stealing from the marriage. This is protecting your ability to function if joint account access is cut off. It can be cut off quickly. You have the right to copies of all joint financial documents, tax returns, bank statements, mortgage records. You do not need permission to photograph them. They belong to you too. If you are pregnant or recently postpartum, you have specific legal protections that a qualified attorney will know how to deploy. You are not more vulnerable because you are pregnant. You are in certain specific and significant ways, holding more legal weight than you realize. Know your weight. And now, back to Claire Henderson and the 36 hours in which everything she thought she had secured came apart. Brad Henderson had not become a senior partner at one of Chicago's top law firms without developing the ability to read a room he was not standing in. He had also, as it turned out, done something that Claire had not considered. Something that would become the first real test of how thoroughly she had prepared. His paralegal was a woman named Gretchen. She had worked for Brad for 6 years. She was efficient, loyal, and devoted in the particular way that long professional relationships can curdle into something less neutral than either party would name out loud. Claire had walked into Meg Crawford's building on a Wednesday morning. Meg Crawford's office was 4 blocks from Brad's. On Thursday morning, Gretchen sent Brad a text that read simply, "Saw your wife going into the Crawford building yesterday. Just a heads up." Brad Henderson sat in his office for 45 minutes after reading that text. Then he called his own attorney. On Friday morning, 38 hours after Claire had sent the text that said, "I have got him," a process server appeared at their front door at 8:15. Brad was not at the office. He had told Claire he had an early meeting. He was in fact at his attorney's office across town, sitting across from a man named Gerald Watts, who had spent 22 years in family court, who had spent the previous 18 hours filing paperwork that was designed to reframe the entire situation. before Claire could establish the frame herself. Claire answered the door. The man on the step handed her a sealed envelope and said her name in the flat professional tone of someone who delivers bad news for a living and has stopped attaching to it. She took the envelope inside. She sat at the kitchen table. She opened it. It was a petition for dissolution of marriage, filed by Brad Henderson, citing irreconcilable differences. He had filed first. Attached was a motion filed under seal, which meant a judge had already reviewed it privately. The motion alleged that Claire Henderson had exhibited a pattern of emotional volatility during the pregnancy period that gave the petitioner reasonable concern regarding the welfare of the minor child. The motion cited 3 incidents. All of them were real. None of them were described in any way that resembled what had actually happened. A heated argument in March in which a neighbor had heard raised voices, and Claire had briefly stepped outside to sit on the porch because she needed air. Brad's filing described it as an escalating episode requiring de-escalation distance. A conversation with her doctor in June, during which Claire had disclosed she was experiencing significant anxiety following her previous losses. Brad had somehow obtained a reference to that appointment. He described it as documented psychological instability. A dinner party in August, where Donna and Tyler came over and toasted Claire's pregnancy, and she cried because she was happy, because she was finally, actually happy. Brad's filing described it as a disproportionate emotional response requiring monitoring. He had watched her cry with relief, and he had filed it away. The motion also requested a temporary order freezing their joint accounts, pending full financial disclosure, on the grounds that Claire had been removing and photographing marital financial documents without consent. She had every legal right to those documents. Meg confirmed this within the hour. But the accounts were frozen before Meg could file a response. Claire discovered this when she went to the pharmacy for her prenatal vitamins that afternoon, and her card was declined. She was 7 months pregnant. She was standing at a counter. The card would not go through. The person behind her looked away with the particular polite discomfort of a stranger witnessing someone's private difficulty in a public place. She paid with the $60 in cash she happened to have in her wallet. She drove to the pharmacy parking lot and she sat. She had expected him to be angry. She had expected denial, or negotiation, or the specific defensive maneuvering what she had watched him deploy in depositions during his early years at the firm. She had expected him to come home and say her name in the voice that meant "we need to talk." She had not expected this. She had not expected him to look at 8 years of her life, her softness, her adaptability, her tears of relief at a dinner table, and convert it into a legal instrument. She called Meg. Meg said, "This is a pressure tactic. It is designed to make you feel like you have already lost. You have not lost anything. He just turned the lights off in the room to make you think there is nothing there. We are going to turn them back on." She called Donna. Then she sat in the parking lot for a while, and she looked out the window at the ordinary Thursday afternoon going on around her. And she thought, very clearly, he did this because he is afraid. He looked at what I had gathered, and he was afraid. Good, she thought. Be afraid. She drove home and made dinner. She was not done yet, not by a long way. By Monday morning, Meg Crawford had filed an emergency response to the account freeze. By Monday afternoon, Claire was granted access to a monthly sum for reasonable prenatal and household expenses pending the full hearing. By Wednesday, Meg had subpoenaed Brad's complete financial records going back 4 years. And this is where the story took a turn that even Meg Crawford had not seen coming. Tyler Sullivan spent a Sunday afternoon with Claire at Donna's kitchen table, walking her through the financial records she had already pulled from their joint accounts before the freeze. He was not investigating anything she did not have the right to see. He was helping her understand what she was looking at. He had spent 15 years in information technology, and he had the particular quality of someone who is very good at finding patterns in numbers that other people look past. What he found, in the 4th year of their joint investment statements, was a pattern: quarterly transfers. modest individual amounts, 12,000 here, 8,000 there, always to an account labeled double or retained earnings, which sounded like a firm account, which was precisely why Claire had never questioned it. It was not a firm account. Tyler found the incorporation records in 40 minutes. A retained earnings LLC, registered in Delaware in 2021. Sole member, Bradley R. Henderson. Brad had been moving money out of their marital assets for 3 years. Not aggressively, not in amounts that screamed fraud. In the careful, incremental way of a man who had been planning a departure for a long time and wanted to land softly when he arrived. 18 months of emails with Kayla, 3 years of quiet asset movement. This was not a man who had fallen into something and could not find his way out. This was a man who had been building a door behind a wall. Meg Crawford. When presented with the Delaware LLC documentation the following Monday morning, said 4 words. This changes everything significantly. She said it with a stillness that told Claire more than any explanation could have about what those 4 words actually meant. In Illinois, she continued, concealing marital assets is not merely grounds for an unfavorable division ruling. A judge can award the entire concealed amount to the non-concealing spouse, with penalties. And in a case where the concealing spouse has also been documented in an extramarital relationship, and has already demonstrated a willingness to misrepresent evidence in a court filing, the court's disposition toward that spouse tends to become significantly less accommodating. How much? Claire said. Meg did the calculation quietly. Then she said a number. Claire sat back, for the first time in 3 weeks. Something that was not grief and was not strategy moved through her. It was the specific sensation of understanding that the truth carries more weight than the lie built to conceal it, that Brad had spent 3 years making himself feel untouchable, and every single thing he had done to feel untouchable had left a document, a receipt, a transfer record, a registration number. She texted Donna that evening. She wrote, "The full picture is bigger than I understood. I will explain everything Thursday. I think we are okay." She believed it. She was sitting at her kitchen table, 35 weeks pregnant, with her daughter moving slowly against her ribs as in the way she moved when Claire was still, and she looked at the text message, and she believed it. She was wrong. The next 72 hours were going to test her in ways that everything before had not prepared her for. And the testing was not going to come from Brad's attorney. It was going to come from Brad himself, and from a discovery about the nature of what he had been doing inside their home. On a Thursday morning, 3 weeks before Claire's due date, Meg Crawford received a new filing from Brad's legal team. It was not a response to the asset discovery. It was something else entirely. Brad Henderson had hired a forensic psychologist named Dr. Gordon Price, known in Chicago family law circles as an evaluator whose assessments reliably supported whichever spouse had retained him, to conduct a private psychiatric evaluation of Claire. The evaluation had not involved speaking to Claire. It had not involved any direct observation of Claire. It had involved reviewing a collection of audio recordings. Brad had been recording conversations inside their home since July. 4 months of recordings, a small device he kept in his home office, a room Claire entered daily. The excerpts that Dr. Price had selected for his evaluation had been chosen with precision. Claire saying, "I cannot do this anymore," which she had said after a difficult night at 30 weeks, lying awake with leg cramps at 2 in the morning. Speaking to herself, meaning the physical exhaustion of late pregnancy. The recording did not include the preceding context. It included only those 6 words. Claire saying, "Sometimes I feel completely invisible in this marriage," which was true, and which she had said during a conversation she had initiated in September about communication and distance and the specific grief of trying to reconnect with someone who has already mentally left. The recording was submitted as evidence of a deteriorating sense of self and possible dissociative tendencies. And Claire, in what she had believed was a private phone call with Donna, saying, "I do not know how much more of this I can hold." She had been talking about the pregnancy, about the fear that lived in her since the 2 losses, the the quiet dread that had not fully released even when everything was going well. She had been telling her best friend the truth about what it cost her to carry this hope carefully, day after day, when previous hope had been taken. Dr. Price's report characterized that sentence as consistent with suicidal ideation or extreme psychological distress, requiring further evaluation before the court could responsibly consider primary custody arrangements. Meg called Claire at 9:15 on a Thursday morning. Claire was in her car, on her way to her 36-week prenatal appointment. She pulled over. She listened to Meg explain the filing in the even, professional tone of a woman who has heard terrible things for a long time and knows that composure is the most useful thing she can offer. When Meg finished, Claire said, "He was recording me inside my own home." "Yes," Meg said, "for 4 months." Claire looked out through the windshield at the October street. Leaves coming down, a dog walker moving along the sidewalk, two kids on bicycles. The ordinary, indifferent machinery of a city continuing. He had held a recording device to the walls of the home they had renovated together. He had listened to her talk to herself in the dark. He had recorded her phone call with her best friend. He had selected the moments of her most private vulnerability and handed them to a psychologist paid to convert them into a legal threat. "What does this mean for us?" Claire said. "It means he is scared," Meg said. "And when people are scared, they make mistakes. He has already made several. We are going to find them all. Can you still make your appointment today?" "Yes," Claire said. "Good, go. Keep your routine exactly as it is. I will have a response filed by end of day." Claire drove to a medical building and walked through the lobby and sat in the waiting room and answered the intake questions on the tablet they always handed her and did not write any of what she was actually feeling on the form because none of the questions asked for it. When Dr. Prescott came in and said, "How are you feeling, Claire?" the ordinary warm clinical question she asked at every visit. Claire said, "I just found out my husband has been recording conversations in our home for 4 months. I'm doing everything I can to stay calm right now. I need you to tell me my daughter's okay." Dr. Prescott put the Doppler on immediately. 81 beats per minute. Strong and steady. She was okay. Claire's blood pressure that afternoon was the highest it had been in the entire pregnancy. Dr. Prescott kept her for 2 hours. She sat with her while Claire made calls to Meg and to Donna. She brought crackers and a blood pressure cuff she checked 3 times before Claire left. Dr. Prescott sat down across from her and said something that was not clinical and not professional, but was exactly true. She said, "What he did with those recordings is something a man does when he knows he has something to hide, and he is trying to build a weapon before you can reach him. You have better weapons. I have watched you for 3 years, Claire. I have 3 years of documented clinical observations that tell an entirely different story about who you are, whatever that evaluation says. I will counter every word of it. Do not let his version of you become the version you believe." Claire drove home. She made dinner. She went to bed at 9:30. At 2:17 in the morning, she woke up. Something was wrong. She knew before she fully understood. The knowing came first, as it often does in the body, before language catches up. Something was different. Something had shifted. She lay still for a moment, and then the pain arrived, and she understood what it was. She called out for Brad before she remembered he had not slept in the house in 11 days. She called Donna. No answer. The phone rang 4 times and went to voicemail, and she sat up on the edge of the bed and called again. No answer. She called Dr. Prescott's emergency line. The service answered and told her a nurse would call back within 10 minutes. She said she did not have 10 minutes. She was 35 weeks and 6 days pregnant. She drove herself to Northwestern Memorial. It was 2:41 in the morning. The streets were empty and orange lit. She drove with both hands on the wheel, and the window cracked because she needed the cold air on her face, and she talked to her daughter the entire way. She said, "You are okay. We are going to the hospital. You are going to be fine. I have got you." She was in the elevator to the maternity ward when her water broke. She was alone. There are moments in a life that reduce you to the most basic version of yourself, the version that exists before every role you have been asked to play, before wife, before manager, before the woman building a legal case in a parking lot with $60 in cash and her hand on her stomach, before the daughter of anyone, before the friend, before all of it. Claire Henderson was in an elevator in a hospital at 2:45 in the morning, alone, and there was no strategy available to her here. There was no documentation, no preparation, no folder with a single letter on the tab. There was only her and her daughter and the next thing. A nurse named Patricia took her by the arm the moment the elevator opened, warm, efficient, unhurried in the way of someone who has guided women through this door many times. She put Claire in a room. She monitored the baby. She held Claire's hand while Claire called Donna again, and this time Donna answered on the first ring with the specific alert of someone who had been half awake waiting. Donna's voice, when she heard Claire, made a sound that was not quite a word. She said, "I am already getting my keys." She arrived 34 minutes later and walked into the room and went to the chair beside the bed without saying anything. And she sat there and she held Claire's hand. And the two of them moved through the next several hours together the way women have always moved through this particular threshold, without ceremony, without fanfare, without anyone to announce that something important was happening, because it was simply happening. Audrey Claire Henderson was born at 4:42 in the morning on a Friday in November, 5 pounds and 14 ounces, dark hair, the specific loudness of someone who has been waiting impatiently and is announcing her arrival to anyone within range. She spent 8 days in the neonatal intensive care unit, which were the 8 longest days of Claire's life, and also the 8 days that, in some way, Claire would not fully understand until much later, built the foundation of everything that followed. Brad arrived at the hospital at 10 that morning. He stood in the doorway of the unit with a bouquet of flowers that the nurse gently told him he could not bring inside. He looked at Claire across the room. She was in a recliner beside her daughter's warming bed with Audrey's hand wrapped around her finger through the access port. Claire looked at him. She said nothing. She turned back to Audrey. He stayed for 40 minutes. Then he left. Donna watched him go and then looked at Claire and said only, "Are you all right?" More than, Claire said, and she meant it, not as bravado, not as performance, but in the specific way of a woman who has been reduced to the most essential version of herself and has found, in that version, something she had not known was there, a bedrock, something that had been present the whole time, underneath all of it, and that nothing he had done had reached. She was not broken, not even here, not even close. 3 days after Audrey was born, Meg Crawford received an email from an unfamiliar address. It was from Kayla Pierce. Kayla Pierce had received, through an anonymous sender she could not trace and did not try to, a collection of excerpts from the same email thread that Claire had read in her bathroom 7 weeks earlier. Not the tender parts, not the anniversary dinners and the inside jokes and the plans for a future that Brad had described as just a matter of time. The other parts, the parts where Brad had written, "In February, Claire is a lot to manage. She has always been emotionally demanding. Being around her is exhausting." The parts where he had written, "In May, she does not make me feel anything anymore. I stay because the situation is complicated, not because I want to be there." The parts where he had written, "In August, after the baby, it is easier to negotiate when there is a child involved. Gives me leverage." Kayla Pierce had read those excerpts 8 times. Then she had called Meg Crawford's office and made an appointment. She arrived on a Thursday, 4 days after Audrey's birth. She sat across from Meg in the office on the 31st floor and she said, before Meg could say anything, "I know what you probably think about me. I am not here to argue with that. I am here because he told me something about his wife that the emails I received tell me was not true, and I am not willing to let that stand." Meg said, "Tell me what you know." What Kayla knew changed the shape of the case considerably. She knew about the LLC. Brad had spoken to her in specific terms about what he called the transition. He had described the Delaware entity as a clean exit strategy, he had said, with the particular confidence of a man who believes he will not be held accountable, that by the time the divorce was complete, he would have enough protected that Claire would get what is fair, but not what is mine. He had said this to Kayla almost 2 years ago, before the affair was fully established, before the anniversary dinners at Marchetti's, before the hotel stays at the Langham, before any of it. Brad Henderson had begun planning his financial exit from the marriage. Before he had found a reason to leave it, Kayla would testify to everything. She would surrender her own phone, every message, every email, voluntarily, without subpoena. Meg said, "I want you to understand what you are agreeing to. This will become part of the public record." "I know," Kayla said. "Why?" Meg said, not unkindly. Kayla looked at her hands for a moment. "He told me she did not care," she said. "He told me it was basically finished between them. He said she would not even notice when he left. And then I saw 47 emails that this woman had printed and documented and organized in 8 days while being 7 months pregnant." She said quietly, "That is not a woman who does not notice. That is not a woman who does not care." And he told me the same story about her that he told her about me, that we were maintenance, that we were something he was managing, not someone he was choosing. She paused. "I was wrong about a lot of things," she said, "but I am not willing to be wrong about this one too." 3 days later, Claire received a phone call. It was from Nancy Henderson, Brad's mother, Nancy, who had attended every prenatal appointment Claire had invited her to, who had thrown Claire's baby shower at her home in Winnetka with monogrammed napkins and a mobile she had spent 3 weekends finding, who had been, in every visible way, the devoted grandmother in waiting. She was also, as it turned out, the person who had sent Kayla the email excerpts. Claire sat in the NICU beside Audrey's warming bed with her phone against her ear, and she said, "Nancy, why?" And Nancy Henderson said, in a voice that had been holding something for a long time and was finally, at 68, too tired to hold it anymore, "Because I knew something was wrong and I did not stop it. And that little girl in that incubator is my granddaughter, and I am not going to let him do to her what he did to you." She paused. "I knew about the accounts. Not everything, but I knew about the transfer pattern. He told me it was tax planning. I asked him once, 2 years ago, whether things were all right between you. He said everything was fine." Her voice shifted. "I believed him because I wanted to. I have been carrying that since the night Audrey was born, and I drove to that hospital, and I walked in, and I saw you sitting in that room alone." She took a breath. "I will give whatever statement your attorney needs." Claire sat for a long moment with the phone against her ear. She looked at her daughter. Dark hair, 5 pounds and 14 ounces, breathing steadily, fingers curled around nothing, practicing for something. "Thank you, Nancy," Claire said. She meant it, without conditions, without reservation, because what Claire understood in that moment, in a way that mattered deeply, was that the truth has a way of finding its allies in unexpected places, and that being rigid about who you are willing to receive help from costs you more than almost anything else. Audrey Henderson came home from the hospital on a Tuesday in December, weighing 6 pounds and 2 ounces and completely uninterested in sleeping. She went home not to the house on the northwest side, but to Donna Sullivan's house in Evanston, where Donna had quietly converted the guest room into a nursery in the 2 weeks before Audrey arrived. White crib, the mobile from Nancy, a small reading chair in the corner. Claire did not go back to the house she had renovated with Brad. The house was listed for sale in January. The settlement took 6 weeks to finalize. 6 weeks during which the full weight of the Delaware LLC evidence, Kayla's voluntary testimony, Nancy's sworn statement, and 3 years of Dr. Prescott's detailed clinical notes were methodically and completely deployed by Meg Crawford against the position Brad's attorney had attempted to construct. Brad's attorney, at a certain point in early January, stopped fighting and started managing. The final terms included the following. 60% of the home sale proceeds to Claire, a full return of the concealed LLC assets, valued at $312,000. To Claire, a penalty assessment from the presiding judge for the fraudulent transfer, a number described in open court as commensurate with the deliberate and sustained nature of the concealment. Primary physical custody of Audrey to Claire. Brad granted structured visitation every other weekend and one weekday evening, to be revisited as Audrey grew. All legal fees paid by Brad, including Meg Crawford's full invoice. The judge, the Honorable Patricia Ashford, who had been on the family court bench for 16 years, made a remark at the close of the proceeding that was not technically part of the ruling. Meg Crawford wrote it down verbatim on a yellow legal pad and handed it to Claire in the hallway outside the courtroom. The note read, "The documentation presented by the petitioner in this case represents a level of care and precision that this court rarely sees. The welfare of the minor child is best served by a primary custodial arrangement with the parent who has demonstrated both the capacity for strategic composure and the consistent prioritization of the child's well-being throughout these proceedings." Claire read the note. Donna was standing beside her. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Donna said, "Strategic composure. She basically called you a badass in legal language." "I know," Claire said. She folded the yellow legal pad note carefully and put it in her coat pocket, and they walked out of the building into a January afternoon in Chicago that was cold and ordinary and entirely beautiful. She stood on the sidewalk and tilted her face up slightly, the way you tilt your face when you have been bracing for impact for a very long time, and you finally stop. Kayla Pierce left Whitmore and Associates in February. She sent Claire one email, brief, asking for nothing. It said only, "I hope Audrey is healthy and loud. I hope you are okay." Claire wrote back 2 sentences. "She is both of those things. Thank you for what you did." She did not write more. She did not need to. Nancy Henderson sees Audrey every other Sunday. She and Claire have a relationship that is neither simple nor easily named. It is the relationship of 2 women who were both failed by the same man and who are choosing, with full awareness of the cost, not to let that define what they build for the benefit of a dark-haired girl who is currently the loudest person in whatever room she occupies. Brad shows up for his scheduled visitation. He is managing himself appropriately. Or Claire has moved past the point where his demeanor registers. Both of those things may be true at the same time. She has stopped needing to know which one it is. Claire moved into her own apartment in Lincoln Park in February. 2 bedrooms. The second one has a reading nook she built herself on a Saturday afternoon with a YouTube tutorial and a level and a shelf kit from the hardware store. She rehung the garden window. She found one at a salvage site and a contractor who could make it fit. It looks exactly right. She started Henderson events again in the spring, one event at a time, on her own schedule, in the way of a woman who has learned, at considerable personal cost, the danger of letting her timeline be determined by someone else's comfort. In April, Audrey Claire Henderson laughed for the first time. She was lying on the playmat in the living room of the Lincoln Park apartment, looking at a mobile rotating slowly above her, and something about the light or the movement, or simply the fact of being alive in the world struck her as worth celebrating. And she laughed. Claire was sitting 2 feet away. She heard it, and she went absolutely still. She said, very quietly, "There you are," as though she had been expecting her, as though she had always known this person was in there. "Now I want to spend a few minutes with you, because I do not think this story is really about divorce. I think it is about the specific and painful gap between the life you are living and the life you believe you are living, and what happens when a woman decides to see that gap clearly, instead of explaining it away." Claire Henderson was not a weak woman who became strong. She was a strong woman who had, over many years, redirected the full force of her capability toward maintaining a structure that was not serving her, because the structure felt like stability, and stability felt like safety. And safety, she had come to believe, was the closest available substitute for love. That is not a failure of intelligence. That is what long-term erosion looks like from the inside. When it happens gradually and quietly, and with someone who is good at making you feel like the erosion is reasonable. There are 5 things I want you to carry from her story. The first is this. The moment you decide to see clearly rather than explain away is the most powerful moment available to you. Not the confrontation, not the legal filing, not the day the papers are signed, the moment of clear seeing. When you stop reaching for the interpretation that makes everything fine, and you allow yourself to know what you already know. That moment is the beginning of everything that comes after. The second is this. Composure is not the same thing as suppression. Claire felt everything. In the bathroom at 2 in the morning. In the hospital parking lot after her prenatal appointment. In the elevator of a hospital on the night she went into labor alone. She felt every single bit of it. She simply refused to deploy it reactively. In a direction that would cost her the advantage she had built. Feeling your pain and weaponizing your pain are 2 different things. The first is necessary. The second is a choice. The third is this. The people who help you will not always be the ones you expected. Kayla Pierce came to Meg Crawford's office voluntarily. Nancy Henderson sent emails in the middle of the night. Tyler Sullivan spent a Sunday afternoon at a kitchen table, helping a woman he cared about understand what she was entitled to see. Your preconceptions about who is on your side in a crisis are often wrong in both directions. Be willing to receive help from unexpected places, and be willing to offer it. The fourth is this. A man who plans his exit while remaining in your house is not a man who stopped loving you. He is a man who never made the decision that love actually requires. The daily decision, the active choice, the willingness to be uncomfortable for the sake of something real. You cannot negotiate with someone who is never negotiating in good faith. You can only document, prepare, and move. The fifth, and this one is for anyone watching who is pregnant, or who has been pregnant, or who is a mother in any form. Brad Henderson believed a pregnant wife was a manageable situation. He believed that timing his maneuvering around her pregnancy gave him an advantage, that she would be too frightened, too exhausted, too physically consumed to respond with full force. He was wrong. In 32 weeks of pregnancy, across 2 parallel investigations, 3 attorney consultations, 1 account freeze, 1 sealed psychiatric motion, and 1 early labor she navigated alone in a hospital elevator. Claire Henderson never stopped building. The pregnancy did not make her dependent. The pregnancy made her certain. Because every decision she made from October forward was made with the understanding that her daughter was present, not in a literal sense, but in the way that mothers understand. That the choices you make in the hardest moments are the first stories you tell your children about who you are. Claire told her daughter a very good story. She is still telling it. Audrey is 8 months old now. She has dark hair and very strong opinions about nap time, and she laughs at the mobile. Her grandmother Nancy spent 3 weekends finding, and she has never spent a single moment of her life not knowing, in whatever preverbal cellular way that babies know things, that she has wanted and chosen and fiercely, permanently kept. That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, everything. Before I go, 2 things. The first is a question, and I would like you to answer it honestly. Is there something in Claire's story that you recognized? Not necessarily the infidelity, not necessarily the legal proceedings, but the smaller thing. The conversation you have been explaining away, the distance you have been calling a phase, the instinct you have been talking yourself out of, if there is, even something small, even something you are not certain of. I want to ask you to sit with that recognition instead of putting it back on the shelf. You do not have to do anything with it today, but do not explain it away. The second is a warning. The story I have told you tonight is a story about emotional betrayal and legal strategy. It is about a woman who was wounded and responded with clarity rather than collapse. It is not a story about physical danger. If you are watching this, and you are in a situation that feels unsafe in a physical way, please do not stay in that situation alone. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24 hours a day at 1-800-799-7233. You can also text START to 88788. All contacts are confidential. For everyone else, if this story stayed with you, if something in it helped you feel less alone or more clear about something you have been carrying, please share it with someone who might need it, not for the numbers. For the woman who finds it on a Tuesday evening, when she needs to hear that the thing she is afraid of doing is survivable, because it is. She is. I will see you in the next one. Before you go, I want to stay with you for a few minutes, because I have been thinking about what this story is really about, and I do not think it is about divorce papers at a restaurant. I do not think it is about a husband who cheated, or a girlfriend who did not know the whole truth, or even the judge who looked at 140 pages of documentation and said, quietly and on the record, that this woman had demonstrated something the court rarely sees. I think this story is about a single moment. The moment Claire Henderson sat down at her kitchen table, placed her hands flat on the surface, and decided to see clearly instead of explain away. That is the moment everything changed. Not the confrontation, not the legal filing, not the settlement check, not even the morning she walked into her own apartment and hung the garden window in a new wall and stood back and said yes. That is right. The moment of clear seeing. And I want to talk about that moment, because I believe it is available to every single person listening to this right now, not just in a marriage, not just in a betrayal, but in any situation where you have been choosing the comfortable interpretation over the true one. We all do it. We reach for the explanation that lets things stay the same, that lets us sleep without the weight of a decision we are not ready to make. We call it patience. We call it loyalty. We call it giving someone the benefit of the doubt. Sometimes it is those things. And sometimes it is fear wearing the costume of grace. Claire Henderson spent years being extraordinarily capable in the service of someone who had quietly decided she was not worth being honest with. She managed his calendar and his professional reputation and his social relationships and his household and his emotional comfort. And she did it so well and so invisibly that he stopped seeing it, stopped seeing her. He called it maintenance. And here is the thing about that word. Maintenance is what you do to a building, not a person. Maintenance is what you do to something you own, not someone you chose. And the moment a man begins to think of his partner in those terms, he is already left, regardless of where he is sleeping. Claire could not have known that. Not fully, not until she read it in his own words. But when she did not collapse. She did not beg. She did not give him the confrontation he could have managed and minimized and spun into a version of events that put her on the defensive. She sat down. She breathed. And she got to work. That is the first lesson. When someone shows you who they are, through a notification, through a receipt, through a word that they use when they think you are not listening, believe them the first time. Not with panic, not with performance, with clarity, and then, quietly, begin to move. The second lesson is this. The women who help us survive the hardest things are not always the ones we expected. Donna answered the phone at 2 in the morning after missing 17 calls. Tyler spent a Sunday at a kitchen table doing something kind for someone he cared about. Nancy Henderson, at 68, made the hardest call of her life because she looked at a baby in an incubator and understood that complicity has a cost she was no longer willing to pay. And Kayla Pierce walked into a lawyer's office and told the truth because she had come to understand that being deceived by the same person does not make two women enemies, it makes them witnesses. That willingness to receive help from unexpected places, to let your circle be larger than your pride, to say I need you to someone when the needing is real, that willingness is not weakness. It is one of the most strategically intelligent things a person can do. The third lesson is for the mothers, for the pregnant women, for the women who have been told, in 100 subtle ways, that they are too vulnerable right now to handle something difficult, that this is not the right time, that they should wait, Be patient. Let things settle. Claire Henderson went into early labor alone. She drove herself to the hospital. She was in the elevator when her water broke. And she spent the next 6 hours bringing her daughter into the world with Donna beside her, and a recording device in her husband's office, and a sealed motion from his attorney describing her grief as instability. And she did not stop. She did not stop building. She did not stop thinking. She did not stop protecting what mattered. The pregnancy did not make her a victim. The pregnancy made her a mother before Audrey was born. And being a mother, truly being one, meant that every decision she made from that October evening forward was made with the understanding that her daughter would one day know the story of how her mother handled the hardest year of her life. Claire made sure that story was worth telling. She made sure it was worth hearing. And now it is. And now you have heard it. Here is what I want you to carry with you when you close this video and return to your life. Strength is not always loud. Sometimes it is a woman at a kitchen table at 11 minutes past the hour, with both hands flat on the surface, and her heart breaking and her mind already moving, deciding that she will see this clearly and she will not look away. Sometimes it is a folder with a single letter on the tab. Sometimes it is declining a phone call and finishing a cup of coffee. Sometimes it is the garden window, rehung in a new wall, looking exactly right. You do not have to be unafraid to be strong. You do not have to be without grief. You do not have to have it figured out to begin. You only have to decide to see clearly, and then begin. This content was manually researched, written, and edited by our team with the specific intention of bringing meaning, clarity, and genuine value to the women who need to hear it most. Every word in this story was chosen deliberately. No detail was included by accident. We believe that the stories we tell about survival matter, and we take that responsibility seriously. Thank you for trusting us with your time. It is not something we take lightly.